Okay, one thing I want to talk about today has to do with musical notation. Well, really, it's about magnetism, understanding the magneto-dielectric relationship, which people kind of have to reconstruct how they think of this, what magnetism is, and a good series to help someone out on that is going to be Ken Wheeler. He's got a 7-part series on magnetism that you can find on YouTube. So if you watch that all the way to the last video, that 7-part series, you'll better understand, I think, the relationship between the magnetodielectric and reconstruct your understanding of magnetism. That whatever concept that you might have in your mind thinking about it. But what he talks about this as sort of like thinking of it from pole to pole of a magnet, standing in a shower and thinking of the water flowing out of the shower head on one side and then down into the drain on the other side. So if you imagine that your shower head here and your drain here, you just sort of invert it out like this and just think of the fountain coming out on one side and then going down the drain of the other. And I think musical notation is a good thing to kind of show you how this works. It's interesting, we have these things like 360 degrees of a circle, and we've got these sort of images that we use, these icons for musical notation, but nobody really understands where this comes from. But I'm going to start with what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, if we picture a sort of cylindrical magnet from the side, it's going to look like a rectangle from the side. From the top, it'll look like a circle. From the bottom, it will also look like a circle, right? So if we're looking from the bottom up, top down, we'll call these sides of the magnet north and south, right? We think of a magnet in polarity, and we think of it this way. You'd think of it as a red shift or a blue shift or a positive or a negative. But in this instance, we'll just call it north and south. And, our textbooks where we learn about magnetism, right, it would sort of give us this sort of idea of the flux is just radiating out in layers from sort of edge to edge here. But you'll see from, more in-depth understanding of this flux, it's going to come off of the edge of the top side, the north side here, as it's flowing out of the fountain. And then it's going to flow back into the center of your opposing side, right? And it's going to sort of move from the center to the outside as it's going through this material. It would be sort of how we would understand this flux. So it's going to sort of have a sort of pattern like this, where we're radiating off the edge of the north, right, flowing out, going down the drain on the other side in the center. Now, there's a point at which the north must become the south. The push has to become the pull. And we would just sort of project this out as a sort of halfway point here of where that's going to take place, where the push is going to become a pull. You think of a riddle of how far can a dog run into the woods? Well, it can only run into the woods halfway, at which point it's running out, right? So we think of this as sort of a plane of inertia is what Ken Wheeler calls this. But it's that point at which these two poles, so if we're going to look from, top down, right, we'd have this sort of pole that splits in the center, but it's this sort of double-edged sword that we understand that's dividing this concept of spirit from soul, okay? But so we're seeing this as sort of radiating from the edge around to the center. If we were to look at this top down, we would see that this would sort of rotate out clockwise as it's coming around. And if we're going to look at this from the bottom, we would see it sort of rotating back in the same manner, right? Rotating in, rotating in. So it's making this sort of clockwise rotation as it's rotating off of the edge back around to the center over here. And it's got a break point. That break point is where you're hitting it from a push to a pull. Right? It's got a limit point where it's coming back in. Now, if we were to think of this from the top down, and we're thinking it from the matter right here, we would be thinking of this as sort of from the center pole clockwise, making this sort of spiraling rotation all the way until we hit the break point. And we understand that this is pole to pole here, so we can strike two poles out here to the side and get the understanding that from the top down, we're thinking of it from the pole, making our clockwise rotation to our break point, and that we're thinking of this from pole to pole. Now, this is what we call the F clef in musical notation, or the bass. Now, if we're going to think of this dynamically from a side view from the pole here, again, we're going to start with a pole. And we're going to think about how we're coming up through the center of matter, up off the edge right here, and we're going to make our outward movement to our break point. But as we're making our journey from the off of the edge of this to our break point, we're also rotating around clockwise here. So if we were to think of how we're doing this, we're coming up through the center of the matter, off of the edge, all the way to our break point as we're rotating clockwise. And at which point we're going to hit our break point, we're going to start becoming a pull, and we're going to continue to rotate clockwise as we rotate back up, around and into the center. So we're going to come back up, around and into the center like this. We call this the G clef, or the treble. Now, if we're going to think of this from inside to outside, so we know our top-down view is like this right here, spiraling from the center to the break point outside. But we know that we have the same sort of push, right, from here to here. And we have the same, it's a pull from here to here. So we have the same force. So we sort of have to think about how this is rotating out. So we're starting with this, but we need to rotate it all the way out. And remember, we're going clockwise, so we're going to strike a line here and a heavier line next to it so that we identify that we're going clockwise. And we're going to start from the center, which would be sort of up here, and we're going to think about how we've got this pole that's sort of coming and starting here and coming to our break point, and how that would be sort of mirrored on the other side. So it's sort of mirrored like this up to our break point. But at the break point right here, there's going to be a point where they're sort of canceling each other out towards the center. This would be sort of like your tropical range, where it's going to go straight to the center. So you have sort of a straight to the center, and then it spirals out on either side. So that would be kind of, and this is your middle C, right? Your C clef. And we call this either the alto or the tenor, right? So, people want to say that this comes from an F, and this comes from a G, and this comes from writing a C, I guess, somehow. No, I think that what we're talking about metaphysical, we're trying to get the water from the rock. This is why Moses can't enter the promised land, is he can't understand what is happening here. So you got to understand that on the positive side, we'll call this the positive side, and this is the negative side down here. Or we'll call this the red or the male. This will be the blue. or the female. We know from Ken Wheeler that we can observe this magnetism in a ferrocell, right? So when we look at a magnet right here, and we're seeing the pole, on the positive side, as we view it through a ferrocell, it's going to be sort of we're going to have a circle in a circle type thing. Sorry about that. But the matter on the ferrocell is going to be absent of light. And we know that we're going to be getting this sort of clockwise spiral coming off of this as we're looking down from pole to pole here. This is all going to be of light, and we're actually seeing the other side of the coin where this becomes counterclockwise. And we know that the ratio of clockwise to the counterclockwise, or the one side to the other, is always phi to 1. Right, so that's going to be important to understand later, that, you know, we've been able to see this now since 2014, observing the way the water flows out of the rock under a ferrocell. Now, if we use a negatively charged device like a cathode ray television tube, you're going to get the inverse of this. So the matter itself is going to be illuminated. It's going to have the potential for light, and you're going to have the space around it is going to be absent of light, right? And then you're going to be seeing how this is sort of spiraling in. So this is key to beginning to understand the water from the rock, and later on how you're going to understand the Lord, and then be able to put all the pieces together as I see it in the explanation in the scripture. But start with this. Start with Ken Wheeler, 7-part series. Right? Reconstruct your understanding of this relationship, and then just kind of understand how this is actually moving off of the edge into the center. These other metaphysical symbols are here to help us. But yeah, just think about how we have to see it from the positive side in a ferrocell, and then project how you would see it on the other side of the coin if you're viewing things from a negative perspective, of how you would be getting the inverse and opposite, right? Inverse and opposite. So the next thing I'll talk about after this is going to be, we'll get into the Lord, understanding the Lord, and maybe get into some of the creation. But all right, thanks for listening.